Alright, I want to talk about XAMPP and PHP files. So serving up PHP with XAMPP is kind of a three-step process. So first thing you want to do is open up your XAMPP control panel. You want to start that up. So here's where mine is, XAMPP control panel. I'm going to start that up. But I talked about a three-step process. So if you're working with your PHP and you want to run it, the first step is you need to start up your Apache server. So in this XAMPP control panel, I'm just going to hit this start button. So that's step one. PHP needs to be served up, and Apache is the server that we're running here. And XAMPP is just one package that includes Apache. So step one, make sure that's running. Otherwise, when you try to test and run your PHP, it won't work, or you'll get errors because Apache's not running. Step two is making sure your files are in the right spot, and this is an important step. Okay, since we're emulating a server here, your PHP and HTML files need to be in a particular folder location, and that is in the htdocs folders, and I'll show you where that is. So if you're creating an HTML file in, let's say, Notepad or Notepad++, what you can do is when you save the file, you can save it into this location. Or if you've done like I did and you've saved it out on the desktop, what you'll need to do is move that file, whether it be your HTML or your PHP, both of them need to be moved inside this folder I'm about to show you. So I'm going to take this PHP file from my desktop here. All your files, when you start working with PHP, need to go in, I'm going to go to the C drive, into this XAMPP folder, and most importantly inside this htdocs folder. So that's where you need your stuff to go. So I'm going to put my PHP file inside here. So let me review that one more time. C, XAMPP folder, htdocs. That's where all your files need to reside. Otherwise, it basically won't work because the Apache server is looking in that location for whatever files you put in. So step one, start Apache. Step two, put your files in that htdocs folder. Step three is important as well. You want to put in a particular URL to see or run your PHP pages. And the URL is going to be http://localhost, that's where all the stuff in the htdocs folder is, / and then the name of your file. So if it's process.php, that's what you put here. I've got a form called firstform.html, so that's what I need to put in my URL. So that's what you need to type in your URL. So now it's serving up that page. So again, that URL, it's always going to be localhost, then a / and then this is just going to be the name of your file, which is going to differ from time to time. But there's a couple things. So those are the three steps. Putting it in the htdocs folder, and then in your browser, typing that URL. But I want to talk about the file location, one thing you might do differently. So let's say in this htdocs folder, you want to create a subfolder called coursework or a subfolder called homework or something like that. So if you want, as long as it's inside the htdocs folder, you can create subfolders to organize your files. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my HTML page here and my PHP page, those two files, and I'm going to move them inside this subfolder just to show you how that works. So if you do that, that's fine because it's in the htdocs folder. So you, like I said, you can create a subfolder called week 3 or week 10 or whatever. Put your files in there. If you do that, in your URL, you're going to have to include that subfolder name. Here's what I mean. Still need localhost, But now if I put it in that coursework subfolder, I need /coursework, or whatever that subfolder was named, /file name. So it still finds it, it still serves it up using the Apache server. So if you just put it in htdocs, it's just going to be localhost. If you put it in a subfolder, then you need localhost, subfolder name, file name. But I want to show you another common mistake some people make when they're messing around with their PHP. In HTML, we could, let's say, write our HTML code. So here's my first form.html, and then I could check it out, run it, test it just by opening it in a browser. So I could just double click the file, it'll open up and run. But here's what you don't want to do that when you're working with PHP, and here's why. Notice where it opened, it's got a folder path here instead of the local host address. So when you do that, if I were to say try to run my PHP page from here, it's going to throw an error. So basically, if you're working with PHP and you get strange errors, check your URL and make sure it doesn't look like this with a file path. Make sure your URL has the localhost web address. It's just going to not behave as if it's running on a server if you do this. Okay, the other thing I want to talk about is when you start working with PHP and HTML, they kind of work hand in hand, and there's a couple important references to understand when you start doing that. Here's what I mean. I'm going to open up my HTML code for that page. So in this code, in the form action, there's a name of a PHP file, so that's important. So whatever you call your PHP file when you're editing it and creating it, you have to reference that or actually put that name in your HTML code. So if you called your PHP file, let's say it was a shopping cart, and you called it checkout.php, you would need to go into your HTML code and put checkout.php in the form action. So that's kind of one thing about the relationship between the two files. So here's an example. This first form, I type a name in here, I hit send, and here's the PHP page that receives that and processes it. So the reason it called this receiving page.php is because that's what I told it to do in the HTML. But on the other side of that, there's also a relationship between what's in your PHP code file and something in the HTML. So let me show you that as well. So I'm going to open up my PHP code. So this is the other kind of important relationship between the two things to understand. So here's my PHP code. I'm not going to go too far into it here, but basically what I have in my code here, I've got a variable in my PHP, but it's getting something from that HTML page. It's doing this post method to do that. So back in the HTML, whatever is typed into here, this is in the HTML, this PHP page is going to retrieve that value that the user entered. So let's look at that PHP code real quick. This is a PHP variable, starts with a $sign. To get something from the sending HTML page, it's always going to be $_post, all caps, square brackets, single quotes, and then the name of the text box from the HTML, and that's the important part that I wanted to talk about. So this isn't just an arbitrary value here. This is saying, okay, there's some text box in the HTML with this name. So if I go back, if you want to know what that name needs to be, you need to go back and look at your HTML code, which is here. Here's my input type equals text. So this is my HTML, and that text box, basically this item on my form here, I named txt username. So in the receiving PHP code, when you do a method post, you need to do a valid text box name from that HTML page. So this references an actual item name from the HTML.